Hi everyone, I am Mohammed Saad. These sessions will related to Microsoft MCT, and today we'll try to go deeping with some of security aspects. As I mentioned before, when you work with any customers, you have to be aware for all aspects. It's a very important point related to Azure security. And when you start session with customer using cloud adoption framework, you have to go deeping with Azure security team and leading the Azure security topics. So let's start with Azure best practice for Azure network. Uh, so again, these sessions will be just discussions, some of collect of the best practice to enhancement your network security. So these best practice are derived from many experience with Azure network and security project, which I worked with some of customers in Gulf and Africa. So for each best practice, we'll try to explain something. First one, when you have sessions with customers, you have to be aligned with this one. First one, we have what is the best practice is and why you want to enable that the best practice. Then what might be the result if they fail to enable the best practice, then possibility alternative to the best practice, and also how you can learn to enable the best practice. So all these questions you have in your mind when you talk with customer. So let's jump it with Azure best practice for our scenario today. Actually, there is a 10 of best practice. Uh, uh, we'll try do like a series of one. We'll start with a strong network controller, then logic segment subnet, and adopt zero trust approach, control routing behavior, user virtual network appliance, deploy perimeter network for security zone, avoid exposures to the internet with detected WAN link, and also for optimize uptime and performance and disable RDP and SSH access to virtual machines. And the last one will be secure your critical Azure servers resource to only your virtual network. So let's start with the first one for use strong network. Actually, I like to go to my board here. So let's go to the board to be just drawing something here. First one here for which will be firstly we'll start with use strong network controller or controls. This is the first one. So let's started with hub and spoke. We have on-premise for customers, we have hub, we have spoke 1, spoke 2, spoke 3. Okay, so this our design will be like that. But here for the first point for using a strong network, this have to be start. So we have VM here, we have appliance, we have a virtual network, we have another VM, and we have another virtual network, and also we have on-premise here, and we have, imagine we have internet here, and also everyone from VM we have cart. So when we connected to a VM1 or VM2, maybe in different subnet actually, when we connected a VMs and appliance to other network devices by placing in Azure Virtual Network. So this you can connect virtual network or VNet interface card to a virtual network to allow TCP IP based communication between network or network enabled devices. So the VMs connected to Azure Virtual Network or Azure VNet can connect it to devices on the same virtual network. And also if you have a different virtual network, this is a different virtual network, or the internet, okay, or your own premise network. Okay, so if you ask me now for the first move, because these questions will coming in every step, to use network security controller, what is the best practice here? We have two things here. Okay, first one, management, network, and governance. So we have management for core network and governance for a security. So we have to work on two things here. Why? Because there is a lot of such as network virtual appliance and for example express route or a virtual network and the subnet provisioning and the IP address. So all these things you have to be designed and to be achieved to use a strong network controller. Okay, so let's jump with a second one. So second one here will be a logically segment subnet. Logically segment subnets. Okay, so let's back again here. So here, so here we have Azure VNet. Okay, and we have connected like that. Okay, Azure VNets here, Azure VNets are similar to the LAN on your on-premise network. Okay, so the idea on Azure VNet that is you create a network based on a single private IP address space on which you can place all your Azure VMs here, place all Azure your VMs, you can put it in Azure Virtual Network. So the private IP address space available are in, you can class A, as I remember, class A 10.0.0.8 slash, sorry, 0/8. Class B will be 172.16.0.0/12. Class C, famous one, 192.168.0.0/16. Okay, so now you're asking me again the same question. You have to ask logical segment subnet. What is the recommendations here? The recommendation will be four things. First one, don't assign allow rule with board range, for example 0.0.0.0, okay, slash 25 25 25 5 because I have made it a lot of customers. He allows this rule which will be more effective in his network. So again, don't assign rules for the range with this range. Okay, second, we have to create network access control between subnet. So if you have a subnet here and you have subnet 1 and subnet 2, so you have to create network access control. So routing between subnet happens automatically, and the subnet that you created and the subnet you don't can sorry, for here will be the automatic, will be the routing will be automatic, so you cannot need it or don't need it to create it manually, because it will be based on the system routing as we'll talk later. So by default there is no network access control between the subnet that you can create it in virtual network, but maybe you can create it if you have a next hop. I will explain that later. So this is the second one. Third one, you have to be avoid for a small VNets. What does that mean? I meet a lot of customers. When you open his network, you find a lot of VNets and the subnet, a lot of for a specific or a small application like that. So you have to be when you design, you have to avoid small VNet and subnet to ensure simplified and flexibility. Okay, the four step for recommendations for NSG. Do you know NSG? For a network security group. So you have to be simplify network and security group because later, and we are also will be documented because later on when anyone who would audit, you have to be understand this one and will not reflected with another network security group. So you can simplify network security group rule management by defining something called application security group, and we can do separated session for this one. So this is the four sessions for logically recommendation for logically segment subnet. So let's go jump here with with the third one. Third one will be adapt zero trust. This is very important one. Why? Because today employees access their organization resource from anywhere in various device and application, which make perimeters. You know perimeters? It's called DMZ. Okay, so which make the perimeters security controller relevant. So access policy that focus only on how can access resource are not enough in our situation. So to master the balance between security and productivity, and the security admins, because we have a lot of issues. We work with security admins or security in some of companies. So the security admins also need to factor on how a resource will be accessible and will be of course documented. So for a zero trust, it's called a next evaluation in network security. So the status of a cyber attack drivers organizations to take something called assume breach. So I work with many of customers. So you have to change his mind, especially if you're not educated more with security. You have to work with this mindset. It's called assume breach. Okay, so again, zero trust network. We have to protect your data and resource while ensure the organization can build modern workplace by using technology that empower people to be productivity anytime and anywhere and anyway. So you're asking me the same question. Please ask me. The question is called, what is the best practice here for adapt? Again, for adapt zero trust, zero trust. First one, we have three things here. Okay, first one, we have to work with something called conditional access. Okay, this is the first point. So we have to give in a conditional access to resource based on devices and identity, assurance, and network location, and maybe more, for so conditional access will be for devices, identity, assurance, network location, and maybe more. Then for enable port, actually I find a lot of customers for my experience, you have a lot of enable ports. So you have to be work with customer to and tell him like that. We have to be enable port access only after workflow approval, because there is no someone called security team and tell him please open port for this one. You have to be work with workflow approval. This is second one. Third one will be it's called temporary permissions. Even me, when I work with customer, I have to be working with temporary permission. Why? We have to grant the temporary permissions to provide a privileged task, which prevent malicious or unauthorized users from gaining access after the permission has expired. So the access granted only when user need only. Okay, so let's go to this first video. I will create another video to be continue the steps for a best practice.